Hello and welcome to another Scuba Continuous Intelligence training video. In this video, I'm going to be covering event properties. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data architecture and then what event properties are and show you the different methods you can use to build event properties and then also how you can use them in queries. If you haven't watched the video on what Scuba is or our data tab, please go back and watch that because that will give a really good foundation for what we're about to talk about. So at a high level, as we had mentioned in previous videos, the way that Scuba thinks about its architecture is that there are two primary columns that we need, which would be a timestamp column because we are a timestamp or a time series data warehouse, and then some form of primary key. In this example, it's user, but it could be machine ID or anything else. Which are the only structured or required components to your data. And then the rest of the columns that you have are entirely up to you. They can be whatever you want, and the values in there can also be whatever you want. And the purpose of those columns and the values in there are to provide additional context for what happens at the event level. And as we had said in our previous video, it's also extremely helpful to have some kind of action column that helps define what the event is at the row level. So if we think about this columnar structure for an event table or a data set that you would bring into Scuba, the columns that make up the table at the row level have different individual values that help define the event a little bit further, right? So in this event, I can see user A at this specific timestamp performed a search action. They live in the US and Canada on an Android device, and so on and so forth. And so these components are extremely important to know when you're beginning to build queries, especially if, let's say, you're a newer employee, or even if you just want to explore what things are in your data model. It's important to know what columns are available in my data set and then what types of values live underneath that column that I can build queries on or start asking questions about. And so to discover what those columns are and what those fields are that live underneath it, you can use the Scuba data tab. And this is sort of like our data dictionary tab. And the first tab that opens up underneath this feature in the product is the event properties tab. So event properties are the column names that live in your data set. So for example, here we see action and device type and user. And if I go back to our data example, you'll see there's user and action and device type. And so if you go ahead and do something like click into this column header or this column name, you'll see the available values that live underneath that action column. And so in this case, I can say, okay, the action types that we have are so on and so forth, or the device types that we collect are, the following device types, and get a really good understanding for the data model or the data dictionary, and the things that make up the data set that we're going to start querying against. So at a high level, the event properties tab can be thought of as the data dictionary where you can do your data discovery and exploration. In addition to that, there's also the ability to define new event properties. So in this window, under any one of these tabs, you'll notice in the top right corner is this builder button, meaning that if you click this, it takes you into a builder where you can choose from several different methods. And under event properties, there's label, calculate, and filter methods where you can begin to define different things. So what do I mean by that? Going back to our data example here, let's say you have multiple different device types and you want to aggregate those device types into groups, right? So there could be Android, there could be Chrome, iOS, Firefox, etc. And maybe you want to roll Android and Chrome usage into a high level of Android or Google users, and then people that use iOS and maybe Safari browser, you want to roll up into Apple users, right? So the way you would go about that in a traditional sense with a structured data set is that you would add a column that says platforms, and you would then, for every time there's an Android event, you would say this is a Google user, and every time that there's an iOS event, you could say Apple user, and you would bake it into the data set and maybe re-ingest that, and now this platforms column and the associated values live in that table. Well, with Scuba, you don't have to actually do that. You can go to the Event Properties tab, and in this example, you would use the label method to actually build those things out. So let's jump to some of the examples here. So in this case, you'll see that I'm using the label method. And what I did was I built out the Android devices value, and that's going to be filtered to device types that match Android or Chrome. And Apple devices would be device types that match iPhone or Safari. So this is a way to aggregate these types of values when present in an event to a high-level roll-up category. So we'll see that the output would be Android devices and Apple devices, and everything else fits into this empty category, which you can also name down below here. So this is the label method, which was the first example that we were covering. But there are also the filter and calculate methods as well. So in the filter example, you can do it similar as to how you would build a filter in a measure, but what you're doing is creating a persistent object that lives in your data model. So if I go back to the data tab here real quick, I can search for men and let's see, maybe I need to refresh really quick. And you can find things like this, male searchers from US and Canada, now back in your data dictionary. And so I'm just going to let that load for a second. And so in this case, we have a filter, and we are filtering to actions that match search in the region of US and Canada for individuals with the gender that matches male. And so this is a static filter set that is going to be associated to this male searchers from US and Canada. So if I go here and search for male searchers from US and Canada, now this is an available item that lives in my data model with a static definition. And anytime I build an explore query, I can pull this up and query on top of it, which I'll show towards the end of this video. So going back to another example, so we just covered filter and we covered the label method. Lastly, there's the calculate method. So similar to the calculate video that we went through and the functions video that we went through, when defining an event property, you have the ability to use calculations inside of definitions. So for example, this event property is assigning a number to a day, and the way in which we're going about that is taking the timestamp column, which is present right here, and we're dividing it by the number of milliseconds in a day. And so what that will do then is give us an actual number for a day. If you're curious about the usage for this, please watch our retention video, because these sorts of calculations in event properties are very useful when it comes to doing things like calculating days since a user's first day, and so on and so forth. So tying all of this together, where we built this label property and we built this filter event property into a query, I'm going to pull up this query that I had already built. And so what this is looking at is two different measures here. So the first measure is male searcher events, meaning that I'm doing a count of events, and I'm filtering to that male searchers from US and Canada. So again, if I were to come in here and try to define a new filter for this count of events, I can start searching through all of my columns, which are our event properties, or use type ahead. So here I'll search for male. And here you can see the event property that we defined, which is a filter, is going to now just automatically apply. And in this case, we're doing a similar query to above, but instead of counting events, we're counting users. that fit into this category. And then down here, we have a split by. This is device platform. So going back to that label property example, we have device platforms as an event property, which we saved after we defined it. And we have Android devices and Apple devices definition. And so if we go back to the query, you'll see that we're splitting by device platforms. And so the output of this query shows we have our device platforms, which are Android devices, and Apple devices, which are built on those filtered definitions of the labels that we created. And then we have our two measures, the mail searcher events, as we labeled up here, and the mail searcher users. So that's the second measure that we created here, and it's showing us the respective counts for those things. So this is a very high level of event properties. If you have any other questions or are interested in learning more about how event properties can be used in some of our other use cases, please watch the videos on retention, especially because we nest event properties and actor properties inside of each other, or watch the rest of our videos to learn more, and please reach out to help@scuba.io with any other questions. Thanks.